So for this beer, I tried to throw a lot of buzzwords into just one batch. It's hazy, it's juicy, it's hoppy, it's an IPA, it's a raw ale, it was made with Citra and Mosaic, and it's low alcohol. What? Low alcohol, you say? So I recently acquired some Fermentis LA-01 yeast. It's a yeast that's designed for making low alcohol or non-alcoholic beers. It's very low attenuating. So I got some inspiration to try to brew a low alcohol hazy IPA. I didn't quite hit the 0.5% ABV level to be called non-alcoholic, but it turned out to be a wonderful looking beer. But stick around and we'll see if it tastes as good as it looks. We're also going to compare it to a commercial hazy IPA and see how they stack up. Well, let's get brewing. Well, this is Brent from Cascades Homebrew. Well, thanks for dropping by. This batch is a little bit of a work in progress, but I thought it'd be interesting enough to share with you. So while I do like those big beers, the big stouts, the big quads, big hazy IPAs, when I'm brewing a beer on tap, I tend to like something a little bit more sessionable, a little closer to the 5% range, maybe a little bit under. So I've made a couple lower alcohol beers, say like a dark mild that was closer to the 3% range. I've seen some stuff online about methods for brewing either low alcohol or non-alcoholic beers at home. So I stumbled upon a thread on Homebrew Talk from a fellow homebrewer. He had purchased a commercial-sized brick of Fermentis LA-01. He was willing to share it with others, so I thought it'd be worth giving it a try. I debated about a couple different styles to brew. Maybe just try to brew a low alcohol mild, maybe do something a little bit hoppy. Then I came across a website called ultralowbrewing.com. It's worth checking out. They have a lot of interesting articles on ways to make low and no alcohol beers. They also have several recipes. So I got some inspiration from there from a recipe called Craig's Rahr NEIPA. I thought it'd be worth giving it a try. So I didn't brew that recipe exactly. I adopted some of the ingredients to my prior experience, and also the really high mash temperatures scared me off, but maybe I should have gone that way. So if there's any flaws in my beer, I wouldn't necessarily attribute it to that recipe or his process. So I also picked up a 6-pack of Just the Haze from Sam Adams. I'd tried some non-alcoholic beers in the past. I don't know if I was that impressed with most of them. This one says it's a hazy, juicy, non-alcoholic IPA. So I thought it'd be interesting to both taste this and then also be able to compare it to my own beer, see how mine stacks up. So let me go ahead and pour a glass of mine, and then afterwards we'll go ahead and crack open Just the Haze, and then we'll see how they compare. In the meantime, if you like my kind of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and also click the like button to tell YouTube to recommend me to others. What do you think about brewing either low alcohol or non-alcoholic beers at home? Have you ever tried it? Have you had good luck? What about commercial non-alcoholic beers? Is there a good one you find, something I should try? Well, let me know. So before we get to the tasting, I want to give a quick overview of the brewing process. This one was a bit of an odd batch. First off, my target original gravity was very low at 1022. While I brewed a 5-gallon batch, or 19 liters, I figured I could treat the match like a standard gravity 2.5 gallon or 9.5 liter batch. And I would top up the wort in the fermenter to the full batch size. It might not have really been needed, but the day before brew day, I boiled up the needed top-up water just to sanitize it, and then I let it cool overnight. Also, this beer is a raw ale. A raw ale is a beer that's not boiled. So after the mash, I heated the wort up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius. This was to sanitize the wort and give me a chance to steep the hops. We'll call this one a low ABV New England IPA. My batch size for this one was right at 5 gallons into the fermenter, or 19 liters. The original gravity was targeted at 1022, and I came in at right at 1023, so pretty close. The attenuation of the yeast, supposedly around 15%, which would give me a final gravity of 1018, well, I actually got 47% attenuation, which brought the final gravity down to 1012. That meant I didn't hit my target ABV of 0.5%. Instead, this one came out about 1.4% ABV. IBUs were calculated at 26, and SRM is a nice light color at 2. Given the low gravity, this one didn't eat a lot of grain, so I used 3 pounds or 1.36 kilograms of Rahr 2-row. I used 1 pound or 450 grams of Flaked Oats. used 12 ounce or 340 grams of Weyermann Carafoam. So my target mash temperature this one was a pretty high 165 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 degrees Celsius. I decided to only mash this one for 30 minutes. And as far as the boil goes, there was no boil. Instead, after the mash, I raised the wort up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius. After the 30-minute mash, the mash temperature had dropped to around 161 degrees Fahrenheit or 72 degrees Celsius. I then moved the pot over to my sink where I could remove the grain bag and let the grains drain for several minutes. I added all the wort to the kettle and heated it up to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius. So remember, no boil on this one, so all the hops on the hot side were added into the whirlpool to steep at 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. Those additions were 2 ounces or 56 grams of Centennial, 1 ounce or 28 grams of Citra, and another 1 ounce or 28 grams of Mosaic. From my readings, pH can be an issue with low ABV beers. Both the low pH and the alcohol of a typical beer helps to ward off potential contaminants. Less fermentation means less drop of pH by the yeast, and low alcohol beers have, well, low alcohol levels. Combine this with lots of remaining sugars and it makes sense that pH is something to think about. I took a reading of the wort and measured 5.74. I did some calculations and added acid to the wort to lower the pH. This was successful at dropping the pH down to 4.96. This is the concentrated wort, so the pH will be a bit higher after topping up the full volume. pH can be a bit of a complex subject, and it's something I struggle with a bit, but it might be something for you to keep in mind if you try to brew a non-alcoholic or low-alcohol beer yourself. After the 20-minute hop steep, I chilled the wort down to pitching temperatures. A little while ago, I picked up a small submersible pump. It's been very handy with circulating water through my chiller without messing with the awkward hose connection to my faucet. The water runs from the faucet into the pot, is pumped through the wort, and then I end up with a bucket of warm water for cleaning. Once I have chilled down the majority of the way with tap water, I swap over to recirculating ice water to actually get me down to my needed temperatures. I then transferred the wort into my sanitized fermenter. The strainer that I used to filter out hop matter did a pretty good job of collecting all the hops that were used in the kettle. I then topped up the fermenter right to the 5-gallon mark, or 19 liters. I used the chilled water that I had boiled the evening before. After adding the top-up water, I gave the fermenter a vigorous shake. This was both to aerate the wort, but also to mix up the wort and the water before grabbing a sample for a gravity reading. As far as dry hops for this one go, along with a good amount of hops in the whirlpool steep, this one also got a good dose of hops as a dry hop addition. Added 1.5 ounce or 43 grams each of Citra and Mosaic. This is my second time trying this dry hop with a magnet approach. The general idea is to suspend the hops in a bag in the headspace of the fermenter using magnets. Then, at dry hop time, the magnets can be used to lower the hops down into the wort. The last time I did this, it worked well, even if it was a bit awkward getting the hops, the bag, and the magnet all in place. Instead of just using metal magnets inside the fermenter, I tried using coated stir plate bars. The issue I found was that the stir plate bars have different polarity on each side of the magnet, and they really did not attack well to my magnets. Well, I kinda made it work, but it looked kinda ugly with the hop bag flopping down into the wort. Maybe this is something to work on in the future, maybe with a smaller hop bag, or maybe this is just a technique to abandon. I direct pitched my vacuum patch satchel of Fermentis LA-01 yeast. I did not measure out the exact amount of yeast in the pack I was given, but let's just assume it was around the amount for a typical dry yeast pack. So as far as the gravity readings on this one go, it measured a whopping 1024. Well, that is very close to my predicted gravity of 1023, so in theory, this should produce right around what is needed for a 0.5% ABV beer. It's hard to capture all the subtle details of fermentation on camera. After about a day of lag, fermentation started off at a slow but steady pace. That seems about expected for a low attenuating yeast in a low gravity wort. I fermented this one at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius because that just kind of seemed like a reasonable temperature. By day 4, the fermentation had slowed. I took a gravity reading that measured 1019. That seems crazy high thinking about it, but that's at 17% attenuation and close to what would be expected. I raised the temperature a few degrees like I normally do, but then after a day I noticed some more signs of fermentation kicking in, which then picked up over the next couple days. So I went ahead and lowered the dry hops into the wort, and I left them there for 2 days, and then I cold crashed the beer. A risk that I've read with this method for creating low ABV beers is that the yeast leaves behind a lot of sugars that either wild yeast or remnant brewer's yeast are happy to consume, where in a normal batch they are drastically outcompeted. I'm not sure which might have been the case here, or if it raises questions about my standard sanitation practices, but I feel like there was definitely some additional fermentation that happened beyond what I would expect from the LA-01 yeast. I moved ahead and kegged the beer on day 10. The beer ended up with a final gravity of 1013, so with an original gravity of 1023 and a final gravity of 1013, that puts it around a 1.3% ABV beer with a 43% attenuation. It's not exactly what I was shooting for, but it's still a low alcohol beer. Then I did a closed transfer into a purged keg to avoid damage from oxygen exposure. So there's the beer. Hopefully the light down here does it justice. It really is a wonderful looking colored beer. If you like hazy IPAs, it's a very light straw color that I really look for in these kind of beers. So as far as the head on the beer, it's a nice colored white. It's got these really big bubbles, almost soapy looking. You might not be able to tell it on camera. If we go over the aroma, it's got a lot of hop aroma. I mean, you can smell it from a ways. It smells a lot like a New England IPA. It's got a little something that might be a little off-putting. So if we stop right there, by appearance, if you were looking just to brew a beer to put on Instagram to claim you're brewing great hazy IPAs, this one would be great. But let's see how it tastes. So the initial taste is not that bad. It's got a nice hoppy, it's got a nice full hoppy flavor, kind of like what you would expect. But then as it sits on the tongue a little bit, I get a lot of this bitter astringency. Kind of reminds me of maybe like just taking a hop pellet and sucking on it. So I've seen some research that when you dry hop a beer, it tends to push the IBUs to, I don't remember what the number was. It was somewhere around like 24 IBUs. So if you dry hop a beer with very little IBUs, it tends to add some bitterness to it. And if you dry hop a beer with a lot of IBUs, it tends to pull out a little IBUs. This definitely has a lot of a harsh bitterness that's not particularly pleasant. So I don't know if it's that the bitterness is too strong or just that there's no sweetness really to back it up. So the mouthfeel is fairly thin, probably like you might expect given the low original gravity. So what I found with drinking this is that while you're drinking it and it's on your tongue, it actually tastes pretty good. But then after a few seconds, you get a lot of this harshness. There might be a little bit of a kind of phenolic thing with it. But oddly I find after about a minute or so, once the harshness has settled away, it kind of leaves you that feeling like, oh, I just had a nice hoppy beer and I want some more. So let's go ahead and crack open the Sam Adams one. I've drank several of these, but I haven't tried it side by side with mine. So it's also a very pretty looking beer. Mine's a little hazier than the Sam Adams one is, but they're both almost the same color. So if we go for aroma on the Sam Adams, I don't get a lot that I would pick out as really hop flavors. I get some kind of juicy tropical flavors, but then I also get this sort of like warty kind of thing, like unfermented wort. I'm not quite sure what process they use, if they do ferment it or they don't ferment it. There's lots of different processes that commercial beers use to make non-alcoholic beers. It could be that it's close to 0.5% ABV, or could it be that it's actually at 0.0% ABV and it's not fermented at all, but I'm not sure. All right, so if we go in for some taste on this one, my thoughts on the taste is that it's a pleasant beverage. Is it a hazy IPA though? I mean, it's got a little bit of the juicy character of a New England IPA, but I think it's lacking kind of the beer and the hop character really of a New England IPA, or a hazy IPA as they call it. So if we compare the two, so my beer definitely has a much more pronounced hop aroma, which is not surprising given the amount of hops in it. You know, my beer is much thinner. It's definitely, it's got that bitterness. It's got more what I would think of hop flavor, though it's kind of hidden behind some of the astringent harshness. So while I feel like the Sam Adams is a nice, enjoyable drink, and we'll call it a beer, it's a little bit lacking in what I would think in hop flavor that I would want for in a beer. But maybe that's just a challenge with these kind of beers, is getting some hop flavors and avoiding the bitterness. One thing I noticed on their can is that they say that it's a malt beverage with natural flavors. I'm a little curious what natural flavors are in there. Usually that means they're adding something, either some spices or some juice or something like that. So my overall thoughts on the Sam Adams Just the Haze, it really is one of the best non-alcoholic beers that I've had. So I could see either fitting this in, say between beers in the evening, or something to drink, say for lunch or with dinner. So what about my beer? Do I think it was a good beer? Did I hit my goals? Well, let's look quickly at what my goals really were. One was trying to brew either a low alcohol or non-alcoholic beer that also would be fairly low in calories and carbs. So something I wouldn't feel guilty drinking at lunch since I'm working from home, or something I could drink with dinner even though I knew I still had some activities that I wanted to get done that night. So in that goal, I'd say yeah, I kind of hit my mark. I didn't hit the 0.5% or below ABV that I originally had thought. So if we look at the stats for these two beers, so my beer started at 1023 and finished at 1013. That was a 43% attenuation. So the calories are about 79 calories, about 13 carbs, and it's about a 1.3% ABV. So we look at the Sam Adams. Some of these are calculated based on the numbers on the can. They give the calories at 98 and the carbs at 22. So based on those numbers, if we say that the ABV was 0.5%, which it may be or it may be less, that would make it a beer with an original gravity of about 1028 and a final gravity of 1024. That is assuming there's not additions that add calories or carbs to the beer. So with that original gravity and final gravity number, that would put the attenuation at about 14%, and that was kind of what I was shooting for with the LA-01. So based on those numbers, my beer has a little bit less calories, and because it attenuated lower, it's got lower carbs. One thing I thought was interesting was seeing how it compared to something like apple juice. I would often buy a jug of cider, which in America is just a kind of a raw apple juice. And I would drink that as an alternative to beer, thinking it was kind of healthier. But if we look at the statistics for the apple juice, it has 180 calories per 12-ounce serving and a whopping 42 carbs. So the ABV on the cider is pretty low, though I think it's pretty common to get a little fermentation that maybe gives you a couple decimal points worth of ABV. So the next goal was brewing a good beer, and there I think I kind of missed the mark. It's really not a beer that I particularly enjoy drinking. Just a little bit too harsh, a little too much of that astringency, and I feel like it's got a little bit of a phenolic character, and I'm not sure if that's from the LA-01 yeast or from something else. I do see some potential here though. So did I throw too many changes all at once at this beer? Yeah, maybe. One option for trying to improve and learn new things is brewing a beer and making one change each time. Say a different hop, different mash temperature, and this one, I threw a lot of things at it that I'd never tried before. So with all those changes thrown into one beer, it makes it a little hard to identify the source of both positive and negative characteristics in the beer. Were they because it was a raw ale? Were they because of the yeast? Were they because of the mash temperature? I'm not quite sure of some of those. So do you think this was valuable and worth my time? Yeah, I think I learned a few things that I could apply, both to either trying to brew non-alcoholic beers or just trying to brew better low-alcoholic beers. So I think I might try something like this again in the future. If I did so, I think I would make a couple changes. So I don't think I would necessarily change a lot with the grain bill or the brew day. I think the grain bill was pretty solid. I think the high mash temperature worked well. I might push that up a little bit higher just to make sure I get less attenuation. So whether I'd want to brew it again as a raw ale or if I'd want to do it more of a traditional boil, that might be something to decide. It might be worth brewing a raw ale separately just to try to see the character of a raw ale. It also makes sense just to try to brew a smaller batch instead of doing a full 5-gallon batch. So I might want to try to use a different yeast, say just an English low attenuating yeast like S33 or Windsor. That would help me separate out some of the yeast character and try to figure out exactly what the LA-01 adds to a beer. I would definitely go with less hops just to try to make sure that the hops balance out the malt and sweetness of the beer. So if you're interested in brewing low alcohol or non-alcoholic beers, I'll put some links down in the description for some resources that I'm aware of. But also, check out this playlist for other investigative brews to help you build great beer. And also, check out this recommended video. And please, make sure you subscribe and click that like button. Cheers!